My name is John Kenyon. I'm the Executive Director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization. You're not used to seeing me here before these panels, but when those panels coincide with our Iowa City Book Festival, we like to collaborate and raise awareness and hope that our festival attendees are watching and attending these panels, and that hopefully the folks who come to these panels will learn a little bit more about the book festival. So as I mentioned, we are a UNESCO designated city of literature. We're one of only 2 in the United States. We share that designation with Seattle, and we're one of 42 cities of literature around the world. And one of the things that our organization does each year is produce the Iowa City Book Festival. This year it is about 2 weeks of programming. It got a little out of hand for us this year as we had more and more partner organizations who wanted to do programs with us, and so our schedule kept growing and growing. But one of the things that we always love doing each year is collaborating with the IWP and having their writers participate in the festival, have their panels be a part of our festival, again, to try to raise awareness of both of our efforts. So we're very pleased to be here today. I did want to say, for those who were in the room, we do have festival programs that are on the table at the back, and if you unfold it, it is a nice poster that shows you all of the things that will be going on throughout the course of the festival. For those watching at home, you can find that at iowacitybbookfestival.org. So I want to thank everyone who's here today. I would love to thank our panelists. I look very much forward to hearing what you have to say. And the International Writing Program is such a gem in the Iowa City literary culture. It's part of what makes us so international and makes the city one that is worthy of a designation as a city of literature, and all of those connections that we have around the world. So thank you again, and I'd now like to turn it over to Chris Merrill, who will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And John is too modest. He's also the president of the entire UNESCO City of Literature network, so he wields considerable power in literary terms, which, of course, we know are a little different than the other forms of power that we are with. Welcome to our Friday reading series of the International Writing Program's Fall Residency 2022. For those of you who are new to our programming, we've given our writers a topic to consider and present to you today. Copies of these précis will be available next week on our website at iwp.uiowa.edu, where you can also find biographies and writing samples from our writers and a schedule of our upcoming events. You can also find this information by scanning the QR code on the flyers at the back of the room. And I want to end that part of the introduction by thanking the staff here at the Iowa City Public Library who make this space available to us every fall on Friday afternoons. And to note that when the writers' presentations are concluded, we'll have questions from the audience. Wait until someone gets to you with a microphone so that we can record this and for the benefit of the folks at home who are watching this. And now for today's panel. In translation, as metaphor and as reality in the ever more hybrid world, translation is now ubiquitous. Languages live side by side, commingle, influence each other. New words, accents, grammars, forms of data are surging everywhere. A writer may switch between languages within a piece of work, or may self-translate, or may, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, deliberately refuse to avail herself of a major language for the benefit of a minor one. Do you too live or write on a linguistic fault line? Our first panelist is Pavla Horáková from the Czech Republic. She is the author of 5 novels, including a children's trilogy and 2 nonfiction titles. Her widely translated A Theory of Strangeness won the 2019 Magnesia Litera Award for Best Work of Czech Fiction, and The Heart of Europe was in a National Critics Poll voted among the best books of 2021. A recipient of 2 awards for her literary translation, she also has a long career in radio journalism, and her participation in the Fall Residency is made possible thanks to the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Next to her is Mohammed Kahir, a novelist, poet, short story writer, journalist, and lyricist from Egypt. He won the Egyptian Ministry of Culture Award for his first poetry collection, Lail Khargi, and both his story collections, Afarit al-Radio and Remsh al-Ma'ain, received the Saurus Cultural Award. He writes lyrics for popular singers from Egypt and Lebanon, and recently published his first book of poetry for children. His participation in the Fall Residency is supported by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Next to Muhammad is Joaquín Ortega, a playwright, essayist, poet, and scholar from Venezuela. His works include the play I've Heard Him Crying in My Mouth, a Caracas Triptych, a book of poetry titled Facing the River, and a book of essays, Millennium Culture. He teaches political theory at the School of Political and Administration Studies at Venezuelan Central University, and his participation in the Fall Residency is made possible by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Our final panelist is Almudena Ramirez Pantanella, a Spanish playwright, screenwriter, and director. She has had plays produced in Spain, Latin America, and the UK, and new work commissioned by theaters in the UK, France, and Italy. Masters of the Universe won her Spain's Premio Calderón de la Barca for new playwrights. And her screen credits include Money Heist on Netflix, the third episode of which will be screened on Sunday night in our Cinematheque series, about which more in a little while. And she combined, and she has written for other film and TV productions. She combines this work with advanced doctoral study and teaching, and her participation in the Fall Residency is thanks to an endowed gift from William B. Corden, and thanks to the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, also to the Spanish Embassy in Washington, D.C. So, start with Pavla.
Good afternoon, everyone, and happy International Translation Day, which is today. My contribution is titled The Unsung Heroes of Literature. As a translator by original profession, I am acquainted with both worlds, the one of the mediator and interpreter, straddling two cultures, loyal to the author as well as the target audience, and the other of the author herself, who has her work translated into foreign languages. Servants, that is what our translation studies professors told us we were to become. I never liked the concept. I prefer to see the translator as a partner. Translators need a very similar set of skills to the authors. Sometimes they are more educated and often more disciplined, and in some cases they may be better writers than those whom they translate. They are also the most attentive readers you will ever get. No literary critic, no fan, not even your own mother ever reads your novel or poem with such close attention, examining every redundant comma, every sloppy metaphor, every inconsistency. Sometimes translators are the first ones to discover mistakes after your text has been read by your family and friends, your editor, and 2 proofreaders. They have to pick up every piece of your text, look at it closely, and then put it in the right place of the jigsaw puzzle in the target language. Of course, a translator can do a lousy job and make your work a commercial flop, or they can elevate your prose and make your book a bigger success in the receiving culture than it was back home. Most fiction titles coming out every year in my country are translations from foreign languages. When you ask a Czech about their favorite book of all time, often they will name a foreign work of fiction they read in translation without even realizing it. Translators are the unsung heroes of literature, hardworking, diligent, and very often underpaid. They facilitate not only interlinguistic, but also cross-cultural communication. They enable remote communities to learn from and about each other, and it is only fair to put their names on the covers of books next to the authors, something that publishers in my country have only recently started doing. Remembering well the agonies of my translating days, not knowing what this or that meant, not being able to find an expression in any dictionary or even online, I tried to be most helpful to my translators. I rely on them to fix every error. I trust them to tweak my text so that the target language audience would best appreciate it. Discussions with translators are often enlightening and eye-opening. Images and ideas I take for granted may not be comprehensible in another language and culture. It makes me stop and think about them. I believe my translating background has had a fundamental impact on me as a writer. I don't write as freely as I would had I not been influenced by my training. I always write with the translator in mind, asking myself, would this be translatable? Is this pun really necessary, or am I just showing off? It may be my impression only, but it seems to me that writers with a background in translation write differently than their colleagues with other professional histories. They seem to be more cautious, to have more respect for the written word, which may not necessarily be an advantage. Sometimes their texts read like translations, either because of a subtle interference of the other language, or because they treat language more consciously or conscientiously than writers without that professional experience. The last book I translated was in 2018, and I may never translate another one. It is all work and very little play for me, whereas with writing it is the other way round. Therefore, I am even more grateful to my translators. While computer-assisted translation and various AI tools have been taking over the field of translation in recent years, it seems that in literature, at least, flesh and blood translators will still be indispensable for some time. So let us cherish them and hail their work, because they bring us closer, and they make the world a more connected and colorful place. Thank you.
Is it good? Thank you for coming and for having me. I hope I will not receive any question after the reading, because I already used my all English in this article. I think I will be silent for next 3 days too. So now, okay. The magic of transferring meaning sometimes bodies. I never met my English translator. He lived in South Africa and then moved to Madrid, while I lived in Cairo and don't move anywhere anymore. When he was still visiting Cairo, he had only translated 2 of my short stories. Stories I thought were too short to require personal meeting between author and the translator. So we started communicating at length via email, Zoom, and Messenger. But he stopped coming to Cairo when I finished writing my last novel. One day, sitting in my house in Cairo, rejoicing that the translation of my novel was finally published in the United States, I was surprised to see water leaking from my ceiling. While trying to fix the problem, I have gotten to know my neighbor, whom I don't see often. His door is next to mine, but our doors are often closed. I knew he was British, that he has been living in Egypt for years, and as I entered his kitchen, I saw an enormous library in the hall, so enormous that I had to ask him about his work. I am a book editor, he said. I told him, I also edit books and write them too. Also, my English translator is British, just like you. His name is Robin Moger. Do you know him by any chance? The mysterious neighbor smiled. Robin, his dear friend. He often visited me here in this house. I paused for a moment. So while I was writing my novel, presuming that Robin was in Cape Town, 10,000 kilometers south of Cairo, translated my short stories, there were moments when we, the writer and the translator, Egyptian and the British who never met, were sitting behind two adjoining doors, a thin wall separating us under the same leaky roof. On one hand, the situation seemed like a passage from a psychological thriller, or like one of the lessons that drama students receive to teach them the difference between reality and the dramatic sense. We have a strange consequence, a problem, and a mysterious neighbor. On the other hand, just as in reality, I failed to find the moral of the story. But it made me think I hadn't met my other translator either. The word "my translator" with the possessive pronoun is inaccurate here. Let us say the people who translated my work, primary poems into French, German, and Greek. Strangely enough, English was the last language my work translated into. Still, it was the language that brought me here, as Natasha said when we met at Chambao House, because we wouldn't have known about you if it hadn't been for Robin work. Oh, then they didn't bring me here just because I am a great writer. I thought in my mind, remembering the importance and strangeness of the translation process. We don't pay enough attention to the magic inherent in it, the magic of transferring meaning from one language to another, and in my case, this magic brought me across ocean to Iowa. But like all magic, it can suddenly take strange paths if you don't heed it. One day I read Lorca's wonderful poem, Elegy to Bullfighter, translated into Arabic by a great Arab poet. I was very agitated by the translation, not because I knew Spanish, I don't know Spanish, but because I memorized poem from another translation done by a man who has neither a poet nor a translator. He was a novelist who put the same Lorca poem, one of his novel after he translated himself, because one of the novel's characters loved the poem. His translation was charming, wonderful. It led me onto the world of the great Spanish poet. But now, having read the other translation, which is very different, I no longer knew which one transmit the real Lorca. Then I thought Lorca's lyric poems, Clothe the Land and the People, might be more appropriate if they were translated into the Egyptian vernacular instead of standard Arabic. So I immediately began translating them myself. From Spanish? No, I still don't know Spanish. I instead translated from classical Arabic into colloquial Arabic. I asked myself, didn't most Arab readers read Dostoevsky novels through translation from an intermediary language such as French, and not directly from Russia? So why don't I consider standard Arabic an intermediate language as well? Some readers liked those poems translated into the Egyptian dialect, but I stopped after a short while, for I no longer knew, having put Lorca through all these mediums and gates, whether these words were still Lorca or had begun to be mine. I was already suffering from another type of translation, which I called internal translation. Throughout my life, I have written poetry in classical and colloquial Egyptian. In my country, the poet usually chooses one of the two. In my case, I published 4 poetry collections divided equally between the two languages. I translated the poem within me for a long time before I wrote it, for the vernacular to the classical and vice versa, to choose the most suitable form. Even in that little journey between the language and one of its dialect, I realized the simple and astonished truth. Synonyms are not accurate, and we permanently lose things in translation, even we translate our poems. Thank you. No question.
Good afternoon. My name is Joaquín Ortega, and this is Translating from Memory. Adaptation. Translating is something we do every day. It has nothing to do with language issues. We want to use the right word with the right people at the right time. We are like Paleolithic hunters. We search to use a set of words that build meaningful sentences and communicate first, even if they are not heard well. Putting them in writing is necessary, but we do not speak to the universe. It's essential to be able to speak to an ideal listener. At least in our mind, we choose subjects, verbs, and predicates as a magician builds his act by pulling utensils out of his hat. Intuitive storytelling versus storytelling. Even when moving from platforms not originally envisioned in its initial conception, storytelling is a part of our DNA as chronicles of the human and the divine. The entire human race shares storytelling, and we all narrate, edit, produce, post-produce, and revisit our daily lives. Before we go into sleep, many of us review what we have done during the day, and either because we talk about it at dinner with someone we love or because we are going to make a new to-do list for the next day, we are directors of our own movie, the movie of our life or a documentary or our own video clip. The ego and self-deception are lifelong friends. We cannot break their close friendship, but we always attempt against the story, whether verbal or written. Not only because we kill it too quickly or overextend it. When the story passes through memory, it inevitably suffers alterations in its components. The materials of ingredients change, and we unconsciously add details that leave us in a better position. We create long emotional tensions or give thoughtful answers after the incident, all to change our status from losers to winners. In short, taking something from one language and take it to another is a kind of abduction, no matter if the abduction was consensual. A space for symbols. If we look for the direct meaning of words, there might be fewer components for discussions, because between the dictionary and the synonyms, there are at least a certain camaraderie. But what is left of symbols in dreams in the personal meanings of artists, left of symbols in dreams in the personal meanings of artists or the cultural perspectives of specific magical, mythical, or imaginary figures? The waking mind cannot fully utilize or use the language of dreams and symbols. There always remain remnants that are impossible to use or recompose. Let us think about some examples. The dragon has a negative appreciation in Europe, while it's a good omen in Asia. The snake is good in the Hebrew dream world, but in popular culture, any appearance is a deception or premonition of hidden enemies. When writing, and mainly when translating, we must look for those common elements of a culture of a language that, without being too similar to the source, allow us to understand the depth and meaning of that which we intend to convert into material for new eyes. The tension between meaning and signifier tell us that we are prisoners of our struggles, and remind us that we read that we want, but also what we can. Most of the time, we see almost always halfway. The best example is the Skull and Bones. Imagine what it can tell us depending our own existential perspective or our intellectual autobiography. It can represent whatever our age, life, readings, or beliefs say. Questions and possibilities. There are many more questions than answers, but without a doubt, we must think about the context, the historical times, the psycho-biosocial framework, and the sources, being a kind of profiler of the author to understand his motivations, interests, and silent dialogues with literature, images, the world, his culture, and even his own work, if the author is building it. So I dare to make 5 modest suggestions for translating into images with a certain level of dynamic economy. First, respect the original spirit. Respect the original spirit. Try to see the soul and even find out to whom the author wanted to speak. This is an intuitive and subjective act, but if done technically and honestly, its results are impressive, as much for diarist and news writer and for pop culture or long form of literature. Second, make the most significant effort to understand the sense of humor, although that does not mean that the desired crossover can be explained or achieved. Third, distrust all texts. They want to deceive us. They are like demagogues who tell us what we want to hear, but it turns out that their compulsive lying overcomes them. Therefore, we must ask and cross-examine them as if we were in a TV police episode until they contradict themselves and confess their crimes. Set realistic goals with text. Not 300 pages a day, however, at least 10 paragraphs a day, depending on the length of the text. In conclusion, following an old Freudian idea, we must remember, repeat, and work. Translating is a genre we are not passionate about, is killing us a little. Working tired is the worst enemy of those who has turned words into a profession. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah, it's working?
Yes.
Thank you for being here. And thank you to Ellie for, she helped us editing our text.
Thanks.
So thank you, I think she's there. My text, the title is Linguistic Journeys. The other day, I was reading the book of one of my colleagues from the International Writing Program. I discovered the following sentence. I think learning the other's language means that you are ready to understand their perspective. This sentence made me think of two things. The first was to ask myself why. I picked up the phone, called my father, and asked him angrily why. Why what? He replied. Why have you been so stubborn about me learning English? You seem very angry with me, and it's me who doesn't understand why, was his response. It's incredible how a good sentence in a book can mobilize you to act, can turn your whole mindset upside down. In addition to my mother tongues, Spanish and Italian, I speak French as I went to a French school. It was convenient for my education. I also learned German, so I would have many opportunities if I wanted to find a job as an engineer. At that time, I studied literature and wanted to become an actress. Additionally, I speak English due to the hammering insistence of my father, whom I was now hammering for explanation. Why have you insisted that I learn English? He answered, taking his answer for granted, for your own good, for your future, so that you could have professional opportunities. Don't you think that's enough reason? I understand that people find it naive if someone learns a language just to enjoy its musicality, to find a new way of feeling and to understand the rhythm of life. But why not? Is it perhaps better to teach adolescents to learn a language in the unlikely case they will eventually become engineers? Doesn't that kill all the desire to learn for oneself and to have honest communication with others? Why didn't my father tell me that learning a language is good because it implies being open, predisposed, excited, and ready to understand the other's perspective, as I had read in my friend's book? A productive mindset permeates everything, our language, thinking, and actions. And sometimes the criticism of the system itself seems naive. I was very angry with my father. I didn't understand why his vision was so corrupted. Languages are like places. They have nooks and crannies, caves, dead ends, places where it is impossible to access, and also luminous places where, as happens with aphorism, one arrives and understands everything at once. Through these linguistic journeys, one discovers a new way of getting to know the world. That is communicating and not just saying words and having their meaning understood. Because look at you and me, Dad. What? He yelled. Well, we speak the same language. Of course, I'm your father. When I finished my string of reproaches, he said, look, I just want to take a nap. I was about to hang up when he added, I've never understood you. Exactly. We speak the same language but don't understand each other. We hung up and I kept thinking of languages as cartographies of places. I also thought that in my text, when I alternated between Spanish and English, the way I used English was associated with the ideas of business, robotics, the unnatural, the unhuman, and the future that produces fear. Also, the times I've included Italian, the language of my mother, in my text, the language approach was indeed more intimate, but also linked to the problems and gaps I have with my origins. The second thing I thought of when reading and rereading my colleague's sentence is linked to this first and has to do with the thinker Frederick Jameson. He said, each philosophical language, each national language as well, has a zone of clarity and distinctiveness, but there are things it cannot say. And another language has a different zone and there are different things it cannot say. There are things I cannot say in English that I can say in German. Each language has a specific zone of articulation of clarity in which certain realities exist. And it is not that those realities don't exist for the other language, but they are more blurred. Writing and translating is like playing to put and remove weights on an old scale with two pans. A writer is constantly rewriting until he finds the balance in his work, that pleasing way in which his work expresses what he wants to tell, or at least can express. The Spanish writer Francisco Umbral said that one does not write what one wants, but what he can. Of his shortcomings, he made his style. The text swings in translation and loses its original meaning to take on a slightly different one. When the translator arrives, he takes out everything and puts other weights on the scale, and everything goes out of balance again and blurs. When the translator is finished, it's another work, a new equilibrium with different weights. And it is undoubtedly possible that the work loses one meaning to take on another, perhaps only slightly different. It has a lot to do with the historical dialectic between form and content. Since ideology is in form, and I agree with Jameson again when he points out that literature itself is an expression of ideologies, articulation is where the meaning of work emanates. And the translator not only translates words, but above all, translates articulations. That is why the conversation between author and translator are so positive, because in languages, as in love, one continuously learns and loses. Finally, in my opinion, there's a difficult challenge for the translator, to translate the untranslatable. The works that I'm most passionate about are those in which I believe the language goes beyond the word. Let me explain what I mean by this. In a public lecture in 1930, the philosopher Wittgenstein explored the ethical and religious expressions which, he says, underlie a characteristic misuse of language since they carry nonsense. However, he concludes that these expressions have value precisely to the extent that they are meaningless, since they seek to go beyond the word. Going beyond the word, for Wittgenstein, is nothing more than attacking the limits of language, that is, going beyond meaningful language. And although he says that language is a hopeless cage, the desire to surpass it has a value. Adding absolutely nothing to our knowledge, ethics constitutes a testimony to a tendency of the human spirit that Wittgenstein profoundly respects. I conceive the function of literature and art similarly. Without the duty of adding absolutely nothing to our knowledge, it constitutes a not insignificant testimony of a tendency of the human spirit. How does the translator convey that desire to attack language, to go beyond the word? I don't know how to answer, but I think there is an element of mystery in any writing.
That was wonderful. Thank you all. I have to say, Almudena, that your conversation with your father reminded me all too clearly of many conversations with my daughters about language learning. Before we open it up for questions, and Ilse will have the microphone to take around to you, let me tell you about some upcoming events. Join us later today at 5 o'clock for our weekly Shambaugh House reading, this week featuring Tune Onder from Germany and Chun Su from the PRC and Germany. On Sunday at 4 o'clock, come to our weekly reading series at Prairie Lights Bookstore, where the writers Almudena Ramirez Pantanella, Zaza Muchemois, as well as the University of Iowa MFA candidate in the Writers' Workshop, Olivia Tse, will read from their work. Our next Cinematheque event is this Sunday at 7 o'clock in the Adler Journalism Building, room 105. We'll be showing an episode from the Netflix series Money Heist, co-written by Almudena. Next Thursday at 7 o'clock, join us for Global Express in the Theater Arts Building, Theater B. The University of Iowa actors, directed by Eric Forsyth, will perform a staged reading of selected works by IWP writers in residence. And please join us next Friday for another presentation as part of the Iowa City Book Festival from our writers. The panel topic will be Writing the Not Self. So, opening up to questions. Gaius? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. I really love this, and I think this is because you are a writer. This is 4 short story you should publish. It's not like, and this is show that writers are much better than translator. Yeah, the one Muhammad read is really, like, I love it. I can't imagine it in Arabic. So I will say 3 things. Thank God I have the mobile, and then the question. Yeah. So Thomas Tranströmer, the great Swedish poet who got Nobel Prize in 2011, he once say that he didn't care a lot about the differences or the mistakes in the translation, because he think his Swedish poetry is a translation of his feeling. And he think every poet, and some writers also, if we could, that when we write, we translate our feeling and thoughts, and sometimes we succeed or not, and because that we change words. And if the translator did something, so it will be okay, because it's a translation of translation. And I remember, I will not give this example, forgot it. My new book, I began it with the quote from Pablo Neruda, the great Chilean poet, with some change. I changed in it, but it's appear like this. He speak about the occupation and about the Portuguese and Spanish, how he say they took everything, they take everything. They leave the language, they leave everything. How and it is, if you think about it, it's connected to translation. And the last thing before the question is, I always follow my translator, Catherine Cobham, mistakes. So she make mistakes because the word you write in Arabic could have 3 meanings or 4. She choose one of them, and often I find the translation is better than the original, and then I ask her to change my original text. I swear it, because it's open your mind. So the question is simple, because it is, should we follow the writers and be like really honest and word by word, or especially in poetry, we should, even if there's some changes, we should do it anyway, and even if have not 100% the same meaning. Thank you so much.
Who wants to take that on?
I was serious because today is International Day of Translation. I will be honored to answer by Arabic. No, I'm kidding. I don't know about the mistakes by the translation, by the translator, but sometimes a funny incidents happened. And made you rethink about your text, you know. So I remember what happens. A woman, a character was my novel, Sleeping. Her name is Sayyida, and Sayyida in Arabic it's also mean a woman. Even Sayyida is a woman from like high class woman, but it's very common name in the opposite, you know. In the poor people, they called their children Sayyida, even it's originally means a very respectful and woman from the high class. But all of this actually weren't past my mind when I chose her name. It was just a very common name. And her husband, dead husband, in her dreams, he still continue give her orders after he died. Wow. So yeah, so he was talking to her, Sayyida, you have to do something, not to eat this, you have to eat this. Tell the boy to wear this shirt, not this shirt, and she believed is real him. Okay, it's not just a dream or something like that. So when Robin Mujer was translated, and he's a really great translator, he, in the first, he didn't recognize that Sayyida is a name of the woman. He thought I was Sayyida means a woman. So he translated like, woman, you have to do something like this. So I read it and I like it. Okay. Yes, it's more disrespect for this level. Yeah. Anyway, I kept Sayyida anyway, but I liked the idea. But in the other incident was very recently, actually, this month. It was very strange incident happened. I found this article about sleeping on the Twitter. The lady who writes this article, a very long article about in Spanish. You know, I don't know Spanish still. So I put it in the Google translator to translate it to Arabic. And I tried to read the article, this long article. But okay, I know that I don't know Spanish, but it doesn't seem my novel at all, you know. It's especially the extract and the quote. The character was really saying something very, you know, very good, but it's not in my novel. I very had this empathy with them, you know, but they're not mine, okay? So I was very worried about it. But did I really read my translated novel in English? Maybe they are there. So of course I'm joking, I read it. So I sent the article to Ruben and asked him about it. Maybe I'm in very misunderstand about the whole thing, you know, I don't know, maybe. So he told me, no, I don't think she understood anything, but I think she has to start writing because they have this, yes, they have imagination. I think she, you know, spiritually she needs this. So I ask, really I wish to be. Just these two incidents, because I was really serious about that my English is really run out in the paper. So, you know, I'm like a sleepy man talking, not dead man walking. Okay, so thank you. Pavla, have to say.
Well, translation scholars have been discussing that for centuries, so I can't really answer in one sentence, but obviously we don't translate words, we translate meanings, and the more remote the cultures, the more we have to use different images, metaphors, whatnot. But what was the question again?
So in your perspective, do you follow when you translate? So if you will translate me in the future, for example, you will stick to my original, or you will go to your way of changing and make the poem much better in your language and don't follow the original?
Because I know you, I would probably want to discuss it with you. Like, should I improve it or should I leave it as it is, right? No, but as a translator, I translated mostly people who were either dead or too far away before the times of internet. I couldn't reach them, so I couldn't ask them what they meant. And I'm sure that I made a lot of mistakes. And now when my translators approach me with questions, I'm very happy to answer, and also I feel bad for not being able to do that, or maybe never trying to do that in my translation days. And when I see some of the questions, they seem too simple to me. Sometimes I think, you know, if they don't understand this simple thing, what do they do with the more complex and convoluted stuff? And then I said, serves me right. This is the payback, you know, for all the mistakes I made in my translations. Let them do whatever. It's only fair.
But Pavla, wouldn't you say also that, because I've had those kinds of questions, and it seems to me that they are often fairly elementary questions, but it then reminds me that in my own language, I take those kinds of words or phrases for granted, and they're coming at it from a fresh perspective.
Exactly, that's what I mentioned in my paper.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
precisely that, yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Can we wait till you get the microphone?
Because what Pavla says reminds me of one thing. There are two approaches. One is if author is available to ask, to discuss, as you say, but there are translators who think that you should not do this. Never, ever. Like, the text is independent. All the problems you have to solve by yourself, and to solve by yourself, and like the text is more wise than the author. So you know, those are these two contradictory. Because I remember when I was translating an Irish poet and I like wanted to contact her, then my colleagues said like, but why? You know, it's like too easy. Just do it yourself, and you should never do it. Like, so I was just curious. What do you think about it? Like.
That makes me slightly, you know, feel slightly better for not not approaching my authors before. Yes, but then there are things that can be simple mistakes in translation. So I think one should ask if it's a linguistic problem, not a poetic problem, for example.
Anybody else want to take on Guy's question? No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't look at me like that, guy. For me, like, I don't mind changing as many things as it is needed, like for the better of the play in English. For me, the play in English is another play. Like, I think translating is writing, is another writing. As long as both writers and translators are honest with the work, because I think sometimes egos are involved, and it's like, no, don't change too much of my text. No, I'm going to change everything because, for example, with my English translator, she has taught me a lot about the process and how, at the beginning when she was talking about that the translation is another text. I was like, well, no, it's my text. Like, but now little by little, and maybe it's also because I'm used to work in the theater where it's always a collaboration. Like the theater practitioners, for them the text is like, and even if you just follow, like you follow everything in the text, the theater staging will never be that text. So for me, translation is a bit like that. It's another piece of work. It's true that I'm very stubborn there's this point that Mohammed was saying about I don't want it to be too far from mine, like I want still to feel it mine. And for me that has to do with rhythm, not with each word, but with a general feeling. Yeah. And then I would like to add something that the sentence from my colleague is from Kang, from his book Dad Likes Today, and it's a wonderful book in case you want to read it.
Thank you so much. I want to point out about the culture of the translator. I will tell you the story. I was proofreading the book of Goethe, Letters of Goethe to Eckermann. And it was translated by a very great Sudanese translator. There is no common mistakes, and the language is very beautiful. But suddenly, the French said, like, comme un cheveu sur la soupe, something that is coming from the parachute. He said, and Goethe said in his book, the big hamburger. And after that, two sentences, and Goethe said in the book, the big kafta. Kafta in Arabic is the kebab. So I said, there is a problem with the butchery of Goethe. There is something wrong. Goethe is hungry. After that, I discovered that the guy is translating from an intermediate language. It's not going from German to Arabic directly, okay? The book was the Gross Burger. So tonight maybe you explain to us what is the meaning of them. It's like the general citizen or something like this. But the closest meaning was burger, hamburger in Arabic. And Copte, so Copte is a character in a Greek theater. It's the big Copte, it's becoming Copte. So that's why I insist, it's not just a scholar homework, because there is no mistakes in the text, but this is a cultural issue. And the other thing is the talent of the translator, because with the famous sentence, the Italian traduttore, what is the?
Traditore, traduttore.
There is a theory that we cannot translate poetry. This is from one side. But from the other side, what Ezra Pound did with that Chinese poetry. We know that Ezra Pound didn't know speaking Chinese, but he touched the soul of the poem. And even though we say that he translated this poetry better than the doctors in that Chinese university. So maybe there's a mixture. Yes. How to feel the poetry, I don't know. In Arabic, for example, how to translate the Quran. This is also a big question. When you take a text with this eloquence, with this strength from one side to another. So I don't have a question, it was just a comment.
We have a question in the back, or here and then in the back.
Thank you. Because once I tried the translation for Irish writer's short story, and that's how I, try to reach her, to raise some questions which might sound really stupid in her eyes. That's how I got a feedback email saying that if you don't understand this, I really question your ability to translate the whole. But it's just this, something, we don't have that term in Chinese, the kind of the, so I wonder if there's any interesting quarrel or fight you happened, between the writer or as translators in your experiences, which sounds, ring a bell or interesting. Any, cases as he mentioned, something like that.
If I may, I just think this in my mind and I don't say it aloud. But I did have a problem with an author, actually, who was Czech. He left for the United States sometime in the 1960s. And he became what you call a vanity writer, is that? Mm-hmm. So he, in his old age, he wrote books in English and self-published and wanted them translated into Czech by the best, of course, because his work deserves nothing less than the best. So they approached me. And speaking of vanity, and it was so badly written, and I was quite young, and it was through a friend. I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to be impolite. But a friend of mine, a native speaker, kind of fixed some little things in his original, which I then translated correctly into Czech, and it wasn't nice. It wasn't nice. Then somehow it was published, and of course nobody bought it, nobody read it ever. But I think that the better, the more talented the author, the more generous they are, and vice versa.
I think you'll say Hugh had a question.
Thank you, everyone. I have a question because I noticed that in Pavla's paper, you mentioned that sometimes when you write, you ask yourself, would this be translatable? So it reminds me of a book of Minae Mizumura, who is also an alumni of IWP. She wrote about the fourth language in the age of English. So I think for example, in Japan, I think there are like two kinds of writers, like someone like Haruki Murakami, who is very popular, very universal, and his work is actually very easy to translate. But there are others like Minae Mizumura. Sometimes her works are deemed untranslatable. So do you, of you, think that it's dangerous to write something just to be translatable?
Yeah, I would like to add just additional questions related with our questions. As a writer,
Okay, can you hold till we get it on the mic?
Thank you. Yeah, as a writer, while you are writing, you also think about your translation of another language or not? That is so curious. But some of, even Murakami Haruki all the time thought about that. And then some popular Korean writer, for instance, Kim Young-ah, who has been here, also think about translation of English. So as a writer, you are also considering about it with just related questions.
Mhm.
Yeah, I even said it in the paper that I always write with the translator in mind because I was a translator and because I'm greedy. I want my books to be translated into foreign languages and make, you know, and make a lot of money. So it's as simple as that, and I'm perfectly willing to sacrifice my authorial vanity and specialness for money.
In that case, doesn't the audience in your mind
Can you wait?
changes?
Can we get it on the microphone?
The audience in your mind. Sorry, when you have in your mind that my story or my writing will be translated in writing while writing, and does not your audience in mind change?
Actually, I'm exaggerating, of course. I write for myself primarily. I don't picture, I don't imagine faces and audiences and nations, countries. I write for myself, but I have that little, you know, ex-translator in the back of my mind, taking that into account. I was joking.
I wanted to add one thing. Well, when we speak about the creativity of translation, generally it is spoken from the perspective of the translators, that it is a great work, very creative work, not only translating literally, but it is something genius. Yes, I agree, because I also myself, I do translation, I also translate, and it takes a lot of work. I think it is very difficult to translate the original into the other language, because everything is written or said differently, very differently from the language into which I am translating. But if I think about the authenticity or honesty of translator, I am a servant, not more than anything, not more than a servant, because the author I am translating, my challenge is to translate as he or she wrote it, in tone, in notion, in philosophy, in everything. I am only transferring him from the original language to my language. So I think the most difficult or challenging thing is the maintaining the authenticity or the honesty, because the author I am translating has also a style, tone, everything is his own. When I am translating in my, using my creativity as a genius into my language, and it becomes something different, more beautiful or more creative, it is not the original. So.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to end on that note because we've come up against the hour. That's another one of translation's limitations.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very much.